All right, we are live. Welcome to the Dr. Karp AMA. My name is Eliana Yunus, and I'm joined today by Palantir co-founder, chief executive officer, author, Dr. Alex Karp. How are you doing?
Doing well. First of all, I always wanted to do one of these largely because so many of the people who helped make Palantir the modest company it is today are individual investors. And actually, people at Palantir, the Palantirians who built Palantir, kind of feel like individual investors. And then there are a lot of questions that don't really get answered in a normal format. And then nominally, I'm supposed to do a bunch of these things for this book tour. And I figured, well, why am I talking to the general public after I talk to my fellow warriors when I can talk to my fellow warriors first, put you guys first. And then, so happy to be here. And I guess we have random questions coming in.
Yep. So thank you to everyone who submitted a question. We received, I think, anywhere between 500 to 600 between X, LinkedIn, Reddit. So we really appreciate everyone who submitted a question. We're going to go for at least 20 minutes here today, about 20 minutes. And so thanks again for joining us today. So Dr. Karp, first question for you.
By the way, I just want everyone to know in the public, I've told this story before, I'm only called Dr. Karp because in the beginning, we had no money, we had no clients, no VC would back us. We were running out of money. There was no reason that I should be running the company. No one inside the company thought I should be running the company. And every smart person, every expert thought we were either crazy or stupid or clowns. And the only thing anyone could believe in was I had a PhD. And so then, and it just stuck. But so in any case, thanks for that. But it's not a requirement to call me Dr. Karp. I kind of always look behind my back and wonder if they're talking to me even now.
I feel like if I called you Alex, I'd start melting.
I always wonder if it's like, when people call me, it's really funny because I often think, oh, okay, well, maybe I would have made my parents even happier and become an actual doctor. Or I feel like it's a slightly risque film. So I'm not sure which one it is, but I guess it's neither now that Palantir is so real.
Yeah, well, it's definitely real, and we're going to talk about why it's real in a second. So first question I want to dive into.
By the way, you haven't even told the story of how we met now that you're so famous.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, we've actually met 3 years and some change ago at the Reagan National Defense Forum. I was actually supporting the Palantir team because Roger Zackheim.
Yeah, we were so unimportant at the time. We were partnered with each other, basically. And no one thought defense tech was a real thing.
Yeah. Well, you were super impressed. You were super impressed when Dan was like, "Oh, he's a big Palantir fan." It was almost like at the time, 3.5 years ago, there were fans of the company, but it was
the fans of the company were at the company.
Yeah. So we
didn't have many fans on the outside.
Yeah, exactly.
Like aunts, cousins.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of my friends and family, they thought, what is this PLTR and why do you keep talking about it? And so I was introduced to you and you asked me, after a few questions, you asked me, what would you do if you were offered a job at Palantir? And I said, I'd start on Monday. And
then you started.
Yeah, started on Monday. It's been awesome. So, well, thank you for.
What surprised you the most?
I think just off the bat, the level of ownership, and there's not like a structural way to do things. You kind of identify a problem, and then you're sort of given the opportunity to do it.
Well, I also identify the person that solves the problem. So this is like a myth that I identify the problem and it gets self-solved. But it's actually, you identify the problem. Also, identification of the problem also presupposes you understand what the problem is. It may not be the problem most people think is a problem. It may actually be something people think is working. And then you have to find the exact right person, almost karmically morphed, to do that role and somehow convince them that this is what they should do. And that is basically how Palantir is built at every part of Palantir. The product, how we built the product, the way we go to market, our way in which we ignore conventional wisdom, the way in which we're biased to win.
Yeah. Well, there's actually that kind of touches on one of the questions. So first question from Fast Finance, he stated that Palantir has a history of attracting and developing exceptional talent, with many former employees going on to build successful companies of their own. So you kind of talked about this a little bit. Could you share some insights into Palantir's hiring process? Is there something that you look for in particular, or something that you encourage the organization?
Well, there are many phases. So the first phase, it was like the founders and senior people meeting everyone. I hired the first 450, 500 people personally. And then there's how you get basically given more responsibility in Palantir, which is increasingly, like after the first 500 people, increasingly my role, though I try to try to dip into recruiting just to kind of basically taste test what's going on. And still, it's very hard at Palantir to get a job if you're not quantitative without me interviewing you. And we hire very few people like that. When we were viewed as a joke, basically, in Silicon Valley for up until maybe 3 years ago, the only thing people wanted to talk to me about was how did you recruit and retain what arguably is the most talented group of people involved in software production in the history of humanity. Certainly, the Palantir degree is the most important degree in tech right now. Or it doesn't. One of our big strengths is, there's crazy talented people at colleges all over the world, all over America especially, and most of those talented people aren't at Harvard, Yale, Stanford. But you come to Palantir, the Palantir degree is definitely more important than any kind of Ivy League degree, which was very different than or Stanford was not Ivy League, but very different than when we started. And even in the co-founding team, it was 4 of us from Stanford, 1 from the University of Illinois. And I would say I always had very, very short interviews. So like people used to like sub 5 minute, sub 3 minute, because I always felt that once you allow people to talk longer than that, they start talking about what they've learned to talk about. So you basically see if the person's been taught to have the right answer as opposed to whether they have any form of original thinking. Pretty agnostic to what that original thinking was. But, I felt like I could sense if someone had taken problems down to the right level of abstraction. And then there's also how did we identify and how did we hire? One of the things I did a lot of in the beginning, I still like to do, is once we had this guy who, we'll mention his name because I don't think he wants to be famous, but he's certainly the most talented engineer I've ever interacted with. And like a standard hiring process, it would be like 3 days. But this guy, if you're an idiot if you need 3 days to figure out this guy is smart. If somebody walks into your office and they're clearly the best in the world at X, you don't need to put them through 3-day hiring tests. So that all that says is your organization is so stupid they can't recognize this person as the best of the best of the best. But as an overarching rule for these things, all these things require specialized abilities. And it's interesting, the ability to hire correctly and the ability to produce good software, as an example, are not as correlated as people would think. Mm-hmm. They are somewhat correlated, but like my track record of hiring talent. I mean, actually, one of the funny stories was because at Palantir, everyone has a high discount rate on everything. In the beginning, they were like, well, why should Karp be doing the hiring? And so they would purposely send in people who were kind of decidedly bad. And then I would come out like, why are you guys sending me this person? And so, I have a longer riff here, which is that, the linked to AI where dyslexia was an enormous disadvantage, even in building Palantir, because in fact, even though I did some coding, you're imposing a taxonomy onto the world, and that taxonomy allows you to control things, which is basically language and software, and different forms of software work better for different things because they have a different taxonomy. But if you're dyslexic, you have a attenuated relationship to taxonomies of all kinds. And so where does that play into all these decisions that I'm pretty proud of having made, including a lot of the hiring and promotion, is somebody who's got outlier talent is, whether they realize it or not, has an attenuated relationship to the subject matter they've been taught. That's the nature of outlier talent. So it's easier if you, as a dyslexic, have an attenuated, meaning a not one-to-one relationship with formal language, to recognize somebody who's going into that zone where you're above while mastering it. And then I think that's a lot of the reason now with large language models, where they're essentially commoditized everything that every normal person can do. The only valuable thing, which is what you're seeing across businesses, is tribal knowledge, individual knowledge, specialized understanding, artistic ability as captured in a business or on the battlefield. And obviously, there being like dyslexic is a superpower. But yeah. I think that's really how that played through.
Yeah, and kind of feeding off of that. So I think it's pretty been well documented about our culture here. Got a number of, I think the experience here, just speaking anecdotally, has been the experience of a lifetime. Garcia, one of our friends on X, Garcia.
Mad respect.
Mad respect. The man is an artist.
Mad
artist.
Respect. Mad respect. I see your stuff.
Yeah.
Hugely funny.
I send it also.
Yeah, it's a mad respect.
Yeah. So Garcia actually visited the office.
The Titans here.
Garcia visited the office and he was impressed. He met a lot of people. He talked to them. He could really feel the passion. So how have you been able to maintain the culture for 20 plus years?
I would say, when you're doing great art, it's very hard to explain why the art works. And so the real answer is no one really knows. But I can tell you there's still magic in this building. And it's not actually less. Now, you could say, if you said, well, where was the magic the most? There was this very, very, very special moment in the first couple of years. But of course, that was also solidified by the fact we were almost dying every day. No one knew how we were going to pay the bills. And I would say that there's a special, but with the exception of that moment, which honestly I'm not that interested in going back to, it's probably most pronounced now. Look, they're just obvious things that, for example, if you come here and ask me a question, you're going to get pretty much the same answer that you see me on TV. Yeah. That maybe a little more vulgarity here, a little bit, maybe one or two jokes I wouldn't tell publicly, but really it's like we are inside and outside coherent. I like a lot of times I'll talk to people about thinking about joining a company, and like I met senior leadership and everything they're saying internally is different than what they're saying externally. For 20 years we valued meritocracy, fairness, purpose. The way we manage talent gives people a lot of responsibility. So it's really an Auftrag, which is the German term for mandate. So you get pushed to the edge. That creates a lot of pain. I would say, we have 4,000 current Palantirians and roughly 4,000 ex-Palantirians. It is a pain. It can be very, very, and also because you have to negotiate with other smart people, you have responsibility. But there's like in normal companies, you're like chief executive for BS problem 2524. And as long as you deliver on that, but at Palantir, no matter who you are, you're going to have to at some point explain what you're doing. Now, the converse thing of that is like when you join here and you're like 24, like you could be sitting on one of the most important projects in the world. And so but I think it's been the convergence. And I would, in all slight modesty, we've just been right. I mean, I'm supposed to show people the book you're supposed to buy. But in any case, the version of that is, for intellectuals, it's like the intellectual treatise of what the reason why we think some of the things we do. But, I also did this thing for somewhat, individualistic reasons. We were fucking right.
Yeah.
So, and if you're right about, not about everything, but about a lot of things, what happens, especially with very technical people, they have a huge discount rate, which is a fancy way of saying they don't believe anything you're saying until you're right.
Yeah. I think we can all agree Palantir has a world-class mission. You're providing the West with the best software capabilities. I think my observation is what you've done masterfully, and what I think is just unbelievable is how you make every single person in the building feel like they're contributing to that. And I think that's kind of how I would sum it up.
Well, I mean, I take that as a huge compliment.
Yeah.
Definitely what I want. And you don't always succeed, but I hope that's true.
Yeah. Next question is coming from a guy named Amit. I don't know if you've ever heard. I don't know if you've ever heard of Amit.
We have the master. It's like it's every OG.
Well, they're asking good questions.
We should call this the AMA. We should call it the OGA.
We could do a close. Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. I'll write that one down. So Amit, of course, he's always been really fond of your philosophical background. He says, quote, "You have a background in philosophy with a focus on neoclassical social theory." I don't know what that is, but I always wondered if that philosophy influenced how you ran Palantir during the early years. Do you think your background in philosophy influenced the direction of the company to have a singular focus on providing value over just selling for the sake of selling?
By the way, thank you, Amit. And I would say you could conversely ask, was your interest in philosophy the reason why you were able to kind of weather the storm and stick with us? I mean, there's a lot, I think one of the overlooked things about, we live in a world where most people doing intellectual endeavors are actually trying to sell us a pagan religion, which doesn't work. So then we assume that the intellectual endeavor is not valuable, but it's not true. So there are many aspects that have really, first of all, serious intellectuals are not as into fads as people think. So being able to reject just the intellectual and emotional ability to not be mimetic, meaning not just copy and compete, which is really how almost every software company that, Wall Street, we look, Palantir doesn't, we focus on our own business, but obviously it's kind of obvious Wall Street was very much in love with a series of companies that essentially were mimetic, which is we're going to do what's already been done, but slightly different. And our CEO is slightly better or much better at selling it. And we're going to go long on them and short on Palantir. And so I think, so then for me, but one of the reasons that our company was and is and still very much underappreciated is we are building for, we are reducing, first of all, philosophically, things to the ought state. So what ought a company do is actually crazy powerful, because that's very different than what does a company do, which is largely mimetic. And then meaning it's just a commodity. It's like a slightly better commodity sold at a probably inflated price because it's underwritten by bankers and everyone kind of makes money. So that's kind of point one. Point two, I would say, it's like my somewhat odd sounding dissertation is odd sounding because it doesn't really translate into English, but in German, it's kind of a not that unstandard thing to study, but the Germanic element of this rigor and asking, at what level of abstraction is an answer true? Is it true at this level or is it true at that level? And how does it reverberate? And if you look at our products, especially where it's obvious would be like, but really all of them, but PG, it's like we didn't solve the problem of stopping terrorism. We solved the problem of augmenting civil liberties while stopping terrorism, which is already, if you go down 5-6 layers and you say, well, you not only have to build a product that the country would adopt, you have to build a product the country ought to adopt. And that required 3 years of me getting yelled at by investors like, where's my fucking revenue, right? And I was like, no, we're going to go very, very deep on this. And actually then we made addendums that, if you look back at what we're now doing with LLMs, we were trying to accomplish a lot of what is done with LLMs with our ontology, if it's going to be not fake, with integrating NLP into the product because Intel services need that. And then the whole idea of forward deployed engineers was to actually increase the aperture of the product offering beyond what the product itself could do. So both specialization, then you have, contradiction between the specialization. People, even today, and this is partly because people doing finance and establishment things have been trained as in a positivist tradition. So they want complete non-contradictory statements. So they want product or services. So the fact that we were like, we're going to expand the aperture of the product by providing services and productize those services at the highest level of abstraction, making dominant products in the world. It seems like an obvious thing that you ought to do. They still don't believe it or understand it at all.
Yeah.
Last, I know you want to push me on them or just extend, but like on the positivist versus ontological, I do think one of the reasons why it's very hard for kind of classically trained, why have non-classically trained, exceedingly smart, intellectually aggressive and high integrity, non-trained, often non-elite trained individuals have such a high hit rate in understanding Palantir, whether you invested or not, but understanding and then putting their money into Palantir? And why have conversely, the classically trained, elite, often elite educated experts, not only are they wrong, but they're still committed to being wrong. I mean, you can go online now and see people who've been wrong for 3 years, wrong for 5 years. They're just like you. They're just committed to being stupid, but they're actually not committed to being stupid, even though it really does feel that way. They're committed to a world where they are everything they think cannot be wrong. And part of the reason they are so committed to it is they don't have the right philosophical proclivity, and or they're not viewing it tabula rasa. The people who pose the questions are just like, well, does the product work? What does the product do? Does it create value? I would say LLMs and ontology at Palantir create value in kind of what in philosophical terms would be called autopoietic, or it's more like classically Germanic philology, which is the system is so powerful that it reverberates. You can't look at the reverberations, which would be the discounted free cash flow, if you don't understand the motor that's creating them. They want to approximate the motor by looking at a DCF model by the way, with enormous bigotry. Because if they didn't mean, honestly, you see these people, I don't like Karp, therefore my DCF model sucks. But the core problem is not their hatred for me or Palantir and their inability to see the world as it is, which is a problem probably all throughout their life. I mean, God knows who these people are married to. But it's actually a philosophical problem, because if LLMs powered by Palantir are anything even remotely like what the clients are saying they are, if they produce numbers anything like what we're producing when we're going to market in still a very, very non-standard, arguably non-optimal way all across the world, where 13% of our business is growing 4%, and it's not going to change, even though I would really like Europe to wake up. And they can't perceive it, because you have to look at how valuable is the product? What does the product do? What value does it create? Can you assign quantitative value to that value? And if you do that, you can have a much more real, not just looking at Palantir, looking at every aspect of your life. Is there a concept of beauty? Does the product work? How well does it work? Is it disruptive? Does it create a situation for disruption in the world as it is now, not as it was in the past? And that's why philosophically, and I think the temperamental bigotry that you see among many of these experts, which at this point really has to be called like entrenched forms of ignorance, because they still say stupid things. Like these are people, but it's really downstream from a philosophical training that is positive from a positivistic and no longer completely relevant set of assumptions. And you are much, much better and much more accurate starting from the beginning and working up. And then, if you want to see the rest of assumptions, buy the book.
Yeah. So that actually kind of feeds into another good question that Luke Kabosh asks. So, Palantir now, safe to say, established software company, but
we're at the beginning.
Yeah, well,
I don't like that establishment thing.
Exactly. But in the context of 20 years ago, in its infancy, you talked about you had these investors complaining about where's my money. You had VCs rejecting you left and right. You probably had family and other folks saying this or that, friends being like, what is he doing? How were you able to stay true to in the face of such adversity for so many years? The company's vision and rhetoric has been remarkably consistent. How do you stay so sure of yourself?
There are a lot of questions in that. These are very strong questions. It's one of the most remarkable things about Palantir, honestly, is if you go back to any part of Palantir in the last, I don't know, since inception, and you read what we're saying the same thing now. Compare that to many others. It's every day is a new story, but the old story they didn't mean it, but the new story they do. So it's very hard. I think at the end of the day, it's just, I was born so far outside the norm biographically. I tend to over-index on the dyslexia. It's like I'm almost uncomfortable now when I go in rooms and people are like, hey, I'd like to hear your thoughts. I'm like, my thoughts? I mean, in the past, people would be like, it was, but they really want to hear them. In the past, it was like, could you talk quickly? Because this is kind of pretty scary. And I'm getting away from you quickly. But I don't know, there was a famous financer that said, you don't ask a bee why it pollinates. I think I've come to view myself, it's like a form of artistry. I'm like a bee pollinating my thing. I don't know if a bee feels like they're an outsider when they're picking a different flower that they like more. I'm pretty happy doing my pollination dance. I kind of find it weird when people think I'm part of the establishment till I open my mouth. And then it's so funny. I'll go to these fancy meetings and I'll start talking. Wait a minute, you're as freaky in private. Basically, they don't put it that way. They're like, wait a minute, I thought that was some kind of act. Well, I don't know, because you wouldn't have picked the seat next to me. But but the one thing I would say that I think is slightly misunderstood often is I do listen very, very carefully, exceedingly carefully to what people say. And again, to this philosophical thing, it's not what they say. I try to get everyone at Palantir to do the same thing. I steel man it times 50. So it's like, what did they say? What is true? What could be true about what they're saying if they were actually saying what they mean? What if you took away the things that I think are stupid and then made those things that are not stupid into a real argument?
Mm-hmm.
is this argument that they're making related to past or present experience? Are they making the argument because, I'm now important, or are they making the argument because they want to show that they're intelligent? What is the basis for the reason they're making the argument? Do they have actual experience in what they're saying, not taught experience, but real experience? And is there something I can glean even from the stupidest argument you'll ever hear? For example, it's really hard to write a dissertation because you have to find something that's never been said and then say it. And I was struggling with an example to work on. And obviously not mentioning names, but this person who I think is just not very talented gave me an idea of something to read, and it really saved me. So you could, The Village Idiot, you can learn from them. I mean, I even listen to analysts to the point where I discovered that they're complete raving bigots, or, so steel manning things. So it's like the real thing is steel manning it, but no matter how many people say things and no matter how many people believe it, I still will not change until I believe it. Mm-hmm. And that's a different thing, because what you'll often find is people think I'm running around the world ignoring everything, or that's the kind of the thing, because so much of what we've been taught about just software development, how to fight wars, I mean, like all these things, it's just obviously blatantly not true and has nothing to do with how things work on the ground. Completely nothing to do with anything that actually works on the ground. It's really crazy talking to, essentially armchair anthropologists, about like things they claim to be experts at in all aspects of life. But, it's actually, and what we try to do at Palantir is, make the nugget that could be true into a really, really solid nugget, and then take that apart. So, and then if that actually works, yeah, I'm down for listening and changing. In this company, one of the reasons it works so well is we can change on a dime. Mm-hmm. Especially we have product leverage and people leverage. It's all built to change. And people inside this, Palantir of now is not anything like Palantir a year ago. And we embrace that. Mm-hmm. But it cannot be that, everyone thinks, these famous statements, don't you think X? Well, that's like a recipe for like suicide and death for your institution, mm-hmm. your personal life, your country. It just, don't you think X is just, you might as well just start slicing the artery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next question, actually, we're going to bring in a guest moderator because I can't speak German. So this comes from Jan in Germany, and we have a special moderator who will read it.
Die Persönlichkeit zwischen Deutschen und Amerikanern unterscheidet sich häufig. Ja. Was können Deutsche von den Amerikanern lernen und was Amerikaner von Deutschen?
Okay, Germans and Americans. By the way, we don't. This is the book. We don't. Just you buy it. It's actually not so bad. But the publishers are hounding me. But it's some people think very impressive people tell you it's great, and it's actually it's very well written. It's you enjoy it. But so this is. I actually want something to spin, but unfortunately I've been dishonored. There's nothing really here that's spinnable. But yeah, this is not very good for spinning.
I mean, if you mess it up, though, people don't forget.
Yeah, no, this is terrible for spinning.
Yeah, I want to.
How about something heavier?
You're batting perfect. You're batting 1.0.
Okay. So, any case, the question is, what can Germans learn from Americans, and Americans can learn from German. So, well, I mean, first of all, the tech AI revolution is in America. So, the first thing you can learn from Americans is get over here. If you're in tech and you're listening to this, remotely in tech, want to be in tech, want to invest in tech, want to understand tech, you got to come here. Now, whether you have to stay here, maybe you can learn, I don't know, but this is where the revolution is. It is an expression in German. This is where the music is being played. If you're German, you understand the power of that. So the most important thing you can do if you're German is, the hard part about being German, the tech scene in Germany is, Germany pre-World War II was the tech scene, was the art scene, was the cultural scene, was the physics scene, the military technology scene, the literature scene, the debauchery scene, if that was interesting for you. I mean, the whole thing was there. So, and for historical reasons that are obvious, it's not. And so you do not, there's a sense in the world now, you're going to hear this in Germany, just like you hear it in the Democratic Party, that the pendulum will swing back. it's very unlikely actually that was historically what happened. Like Germany economy sucked. Gerhard Schröder came in. Some people like him, some hate him. No, I don't agree with him on certain things, obviously, but completely got the economy to work. And then you assume that somebody's going to come in now and just, but if you look at Palantir, it's growing over 10x faster in America than continental Europe. And I think the combination of that kind of flexibility, adoption in tech, and actual output power of the tech means almost all these pendulums swing the arc of history things. If you're saying them, thinking them, you're like the guy at the poker table who doesn't think you're the mark. So because then there's a question of how you learn. You learn by going to the place where people who are the best in the world are doing it. That place is America. You should just either move here, come here for as long as possible. In my circles in Europe, America's being occasionally maligned. Don't listen to that. That's like people telling you your school is working when you're just learning pagan propaganda. Believe that at your own expense, and you will be very unhappy. What America can, and then the other thing Germany can learn from America is, look, the concept of patriotism is obviously complicated given Germany's history, but you cannot run an organization of any kind, of any scale, without pride. And actually, pride in German, the term, like you can't even really say that in German now. Maybe in Austria, she's Austrian. For those who are German, you'll know that. In Austria, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, that's a little different. Like, of course, it's, it kind of pure American style pride may be a little hard, but no pride. And I think Germany's going to have to figure that out, because the current situation is like complete, like you have 25% of Germany completely unwilling to address the consequences of an immigration disaster. You have no tech scene, and you have an energy crisis. This is not going to end well. So you have to be honest about that. By the way, that's something Germans can learn from Germans. Ehrlichkeit. And then what Americans can learn from Germans is, this company has a huge Germanic element. I mean, we work on mandates, so Aufträge, the whole going 5 whys, going deep, the steel manning, the kind of pushing responsibility edge, which is not how people think of Germany, and in some cases isn't, but that's how the parts of the German military fought. The general way in which we're a very high honesty culture inside, very high integrity. We have no interest in lying, corruption. We're not even good at that stuff, which is very, very Germanic. We're actually, we're not like, we're not actually that great at like the marketing sales thing, despite what, people who've never looked at our product think. They're like, and that's crazy Germanic. We're not super good at the politics. People who come here who are primarily political and low substance don't do well. We don't hire those people. No. We're an engineering org. So that when you're learning from Palantir, you are learning from parts of it are Germanic, industrial, and intellectual culture as it existed when Germany was dominant, not as it exists now. And now one of the things I find quite painful actually about Germany, which is, I lived a lot of my life there, lots of friends care about it, I view myself as Germanic, is, what company should Germany be learning from? It is obvious, Palantir, but like you have complete idiots blocking our product, like terror attacks, and somehow they can't buy PG, which we don't even really make real money on. We're doing it to like better the world. And then you have a company that started from nothing, that is the dominant company in multiple areas, and in an area no one understands really, which is like AI production, where AI actually is not a jargon word, is not a science perspective, but leads to demonstrable results. There should be, like European companies, especially German companies, should be parked over here. Like, why does it take the OGs in America to write down every word and learn from us? And who's learning from us in Germany? It's completely nuts. Yeah. And you know what? And then you kind of give up. It's they don't want to listen. It's like, it's how many times can you sit there while your professor says the dumbest things ever and be like, oh, that's so interesting. And so eventually you just walk out and you can't help them.
Yeah. We have time for one more question.
Go for it.
All right. This question comes from another OG, Tom Nash.
Yet another OG. I feel like, I feel very special today.
Yeah. Well, the OGs ask really good questions. And Tom asks, a century from now, when people look back at Palantir's impact, what do you hope will be its defining legacy?
That the superiority of the West was it put into software production and made Western countries, especially America, healthier, wealthier, stronger, fairer, more meritocratic, and scared every enemy of these countries to the point where they woke up every morning and wrote on their front window and wrote on X, we are not actually your enemy. We are your friend, even if they're not. And please do not randomly take out our leaders just because we thought that we might be plotting things against you.
Great.
And that people look back and say, yeah, Palantir played a huge role in both the software production and the people. And by the way, then people like point, oh, isn't that the OG of Palantir living in that mansion? Yeah.
That'd be great too. Yeah. And then any final thoughts on, you got the book coming out in a few days, anything that you want people to really focus on, take away from the book?
I think for most people on this call, it's, look, this is the intellectual background that you didn't need to figure out things but it might be helpful in some planting some thoughts you already, or like bolstering some thoughts you already have. And then, I don't know, let me know what you think.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Karp, thank you for your time. Thank you for everyone, or to everyone that's watching. We really appreciate your support, and maybe we'll do one of these again soon.
Hope so.
Great.
Take care.